The dust kicked up around Natalie Kendrick's worn boots as she stumbled into Winnemucca, Nevada, her arms aching from carrying her 3-month-old daughter for the last 5 miles after her horse went lame. It was July 1876, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the high desert town, making the air shimmer like water over the dirt streets. She had traveled from California with nothing but hope and the last of her savings sewn into the hem of her skirt, believing that somewhere in this vast territory she could start fresh, away from the whispers and judgmental stares that had followed her since her husband died before ever knowing she carried his child. The first door she knocked on belonged to a boarding house with faded blue shutters. A stern-faced woman opened it, took one look at Natalie's ringless finger and the baby in her arms, and said flatly, "We do not rent to your kind." The door slammed so hard the wood frame shook. Natalie felt her throat tighten but forced herself to move on. She tried the hotel next, where the clerk behind the desk did not even let her finish her question before shaking his head. "No rooms available," he said, though she could see the keys hanging on the board behind him, most of the hooks still full. By the fourth rejection, little Sarah had begun to cry, a thin wailing sound that seemed to draw even more hostile stares from the people passing by on the wooden sidewalks. Natalie ducked into the general store, hoping at least to buy some milk and perhaps find someone with a kinder heart. The proprietor, a heavy-set man with mutton chops, looked her up and down with cold eyes. "I just need some supplies," Natalie said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I can pay." "I heard about you," the man said, crossing his arms. "Already been word spreading. We are a decent town here. We do not need women of questionable morals setting up residence." "My husband died," Natalie said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. "I am a widow. I have done nothing wrong." "No ring, no proof," he replied. "And I have heard that story before. Best you move along." Sarah's cries intensified, her little face red and scrunched. Natalie felt the tears threatening but refused to let them fall where these people could see. She turned and walked back out into the oppressive heat, the wooden planks creaking under her feet. She tried 2 more establishments, a restaurant and a small inn on the edge of town, but the responses were the same. By the time the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Natalie had been turned away from every business and residence in Winnemucca. Her water was gone, Sarah was screaming with hunger, and Natalie's own legs trembled with exhaustion. She walked out past the last buildings, following a rutted road that led into the scrubland. She did not know where she was going, only that she could not stay where she was not wanted. The temperature began to drop as darkness fell, and Natalie knew she needed shelter. The desert nights could be brutally cold, and Sarah's thin blanket would not be enough. That was when she saw it, a large barn set back from the road, part of a ranch property with a modest house in the distance. Lamplight glowed in the windows of the house, but the barn was dark. Natalie looked down at Sarah, whose cries had weakened to pitiful whimpers, and made a decision. She would sleep in the barn for one night, just until morning, and then figure out what to do next. The barn door was not locked. Natalie slipped inside, breathing in the smell of hay and horses. 3 stalls held drowsy animals who barely stirred at her entrance. In the back corner, she found a pile of clean hay and some empty burlap sacks. She made a nest of sorts, settling Sarah against her chest and covering them both with her shawl and the sacks. The baby finally quieted, rooting against Natalie's breast, and Natalie closed her eyes, too tired even to cry. She woke to the sound of boots on the wooden floor and early morning light streaming through the gaps in the barn walls. Natalie jerked upright, clutching Sarah protectively, and found herself staring up at a tall man silhouetted against the dawn. "Please," Natalie said quickly, her voice hoarse. "Please, I will leave. I just needed somewhere to sleep. Just one night." The man stepped closer, and Natalie could see him more clearly now. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw. His eyes, a striking blue-gray, studied her with an expression she could not quite read. He wore work clothes, denim and flannel, and a battered hat hung from his hand. "How long have you been here?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that suggested he had not always lived in Nevada. "Just since last night," Natalie said. She got to her feet, swaying slightly, still holding Sarah close. "I am sorry, I will go." "When did you last eat?" he asked, his eyes dropping to the baby. The question caught Natalie off guard. "Yesterday morning." The man was quiet for a moment, then he sighed and gestured toward the barn door. "Come on." "Where?" Natalie asked warily. "House. You need food and that baby needs proper care." He turned and started walking, apparently expecting her to follow. Natalie hesitated, every instinct screaming caution. But Sarah let out a weak cry, and Natalie knew she had no choice. She followed the man across the dusty yard to the ranch house, a simple structure with a covered porch and flower boxes that had seen better days. Inside, the house was neat but plainly furnished. A table stood in the center of the main room, surrounded by mismatched chairs. A wood stove sat against one wall, and a narrow staircase led to what Natalie assumed were bedrooms above. The man gestured to a chair. "Sit. I will make breakfast." Natalie sat, watching as he moved efficiently around the small kitchen area, stoking the fire in the stove and pulling out a cast iron skillet. Soon the smell of bacon and eggs filled the room, making Natalie's stomach clench with hunger. "I am James Ellison," the man said as he worked. "This is my ranch. I run cattle and do some horse training." "Natalie Kendrick," she replied quietly, "and this is Sarah." James glanced over his shoulder at her. "What brought you to my barn, Natalie Kendrick?" The use of her full name felt oddly formal but somehow respectful. Natalie found herself answering honestly. "The town turned me away. Every door, every business. They took one look at me and my daughter and decided we were not worthy of basic decency." James cracked eggs into the skillet with more force than necessary, "because they think you are not married." It was not a question. Natalie lifted her chin. "I was married. My husband was killed in a mining accident in California when I was 2 months along. We were planning to move out here to start fresh. After he died, I decided to come anyway. I thought maybe here, where no one knew me, I could build a life for Sarah and myself. I was wrong." James plated the food and brought it to the table, setting it in front of her along with a fork. "Eat." Natalie wanted to ask questions, wanted to understand why this stranger was being kind when everyone else had been cruel, but her hunger won out. She ate quickly, trying to maintain some dignity even as she practically inhaled the best meal she had had in weeks. James made himself a plate and sat across from her, eating in silence. When Natalie finally set down her fork, feeling almost human again, he spoke. "I believe you." Natalie looked up, startled. "What?" "About your husband, I believe you." James leaned back in his chair. "The people in town, they are quick to judge and slow to forgive. They have long memories and short charity. It is not right, but it is how they are." "Why are you different?" Natalie asked. James was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Because I know what it is like to be judged unfairly. My family, we lost everything in the war. Came out here with nothing. People assumed things about us, about why we left Tennessee. Most of it was not true, but truth does not matter much when people have already made up their minds." Natalie looked down at Sarah, who had fallen back asleep in her arms. I do not know what to do. I spent the last of my money getting here. I do not have enough to move on, and even if I did, I do not know where I would go. James stood and walked to a small desk in the corner. He opened a drawer and pulled out a key, old and made of iron with an ornate head. He came back to the table and set it in front of Natalie. "What is this?" she asked. "Key to the cabin," James said. "About a quarter-mile east of here. It was my parents' place before my mother died and my father went back to Tennessee. It is small, just 2 rooms, but it is sound. Roof does not leak, fireplace draws well. You can stay there." Natalie stared at the key, then at James. "I cannot pay you. I am not asking you to." He sat back down. "But if you are willing, I could use help around here. I have been trying to keep up with the ranch and the house by myself, and it is more than one person can handle. The garden has gone to weeds, the house needs a proper cleaning, and I have been eating my own terrible cooking for 2 years now. If you would be willing to help with those things, consider it payment for the cabin. You are offering me work." Natalie could hardly believe what she was hearing. "And a place to live." James met her eyes. "I am not going to pretend I do not need the help, because I do. But mostly, I cannot in good conscience let you and a baby sleep in my barn or go back to a town that will not have you." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes, the first genuine kindness she had experienced in so long overwhelming her careful composure. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes or say no," James replied with the hint of a smile. "But if you say yes, I will hitch up the wagon and take you to the cabin now, get you settled in." "Yes," Natalie said, her voice firm despite the emotion clogging her throat. "Yes, thank you." True to his word, James brought the wagon around and loaded it with supplies from his house. Blankets, dishes, a rocking chair that had belonged to his mother, food from his larder, and even a cradle he pulled down from the loft in the barn. "My sister's baby used it when she visited a few years back," he explained as he secured it in the wagon bed. "No sense letting it sit unused." The cabin was exactly as he had described it, small but sturdy, with 2 rooms separated by a doorway. The main room had a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and space for the rocking chair. The smaller room held a bed frame and a chest of drawers. It was dusty and obviously had not been used in some time, but Natalie could see the potential. James helped her unload the wagon, carrying in the heavier items while Natalie held Sarah. He showed her where the well was, just a short walk from the cabin, and pointed out the path through the scrub that led to his ranch house. "I will come by tomorrow morning," he said as he prepared to leave. "We can talk about what needs doing and work out a schedule that makes sense with the baby." "James," Natalie said, stopping him as he climbed onto the wagon seat, "why are you doing this? You do not know me." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe that is exactly why I can help you. I do not have any preconceived notions about who you are or what you have done. All I see is a woman who needs a hand up and is willing to work for it. That is enough for me." After he left, Natalie spent the rest of the day cleaning the cabin, working with Sarah strapped to her chest in a sling she fashioned from her shawl. She swept out the dust and mouse droppings, wiped down every surface, and made up the bed with the blankets James had provided. By the time darkness fell, the cabin felt like a home, humble but hers. That night, lying in an actual bed with Sarah sleeping peacefully in the cradle beside her, Natalie allowed herself to hope for the first time in months. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she and her daughter could belong. James arrived the next morning just after sunrise, carrying a pail of fresh milk and a basket of eggs. Natalie had been up for an hour already, having fed Sarah and tidied herself as best she could with the water she had drawn from the well. "Good morning," James said, handing her the milk and eggs. "How was your first night? Wonderful, Natalie said honestly. I cannot remember the last time I slept so well. Over breakfast, which Natalie insisted on cooking using the supplies he had brought, they discussed the arrangement. Natalie would spend her mornings at the ranch house, helping with cooking, cleaning, and the garden. Her afternoons would be her own to care for Sarah and tend to the cabin. In return, James would provide her with food, firewood, and anything else she needed. If you need anything for the baby, James added, you tell me. I will go into town for supplies once a week. I would rather you not go yourself, given how you were treated. Natalie appreciated the thoughtfulness, even as it reminded her of her situation. Thank you. I will make a list. The arrangement quickly settled into a comfortable routine. Natalie discovered that she genuinely enjoyed the work, the physicality of it satisfying after so many months of uncertainty and travel. James' garden, which had indeed gone to weeds, began to flourish under her care. She planted late-season vegetables, tended the herbs, and even started some flowers near the porch. Inside the house, she cleaned thoroughly, washing curtains that had not seen soap in years and scrubbing floors until they gleamed. She learned James' preferences for meals, discovered he had a particular fondness for apple pie, and made sure there was always coffee ready when he came in from working with the cattle. James, for his part, proved to be a man of few words but consistent action. He never asked intrusive questions about her past, never made her feel uncomfortable, and always treated her with respect. He was good with Sarah too, which surprised Natalie. He would talk to the baby in a gentle voice while Natalie worked, and more than once she caught him making silly faces to get Sarah to smile. 6 weeks after Natalie arrived at the ranch, she was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table while Sarah napped in a basket nearby when James came in from the barn earlier than usual. His expression was troubled. "What is wrong?" Natalie asked, wiping flour from her hands. James took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "I ran into Tom Wheeler in town today. He is the president of the church council in Winnemucca. He had heard that I have a woman living on my property." Natalie's stomach dropped. What did he say? That it was inappropriate. That people were talking, that it reflected poorly on me and would reflect poorly on anyone who did business with me. James' jaw tightened. He suggested I should send you away before my reputation was damaged beyond repair. "I will go," Natalie said immediately, even though the thought made her chest ache. "I do not want to cause you trouble. You have been so kind I could not bear it if I ruined things for you." "I told him to go to hell," James said flatly. Natalie blinked. "What?" "I told him that what I do on my own property is my own business, that you are a respectable widow working for your keep, and that if he or anyone else had a problem with it, they could take it up with me directly." James met her eyes. "I also told him that the good Christian people of Winnemucca should be ashamed of themselves for turning away a woman with a baby, and that their church council should spend less time gossiping and more time actually helping people." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Natalie felt a smile tug at her lips. "I imagine that did not go over well." He turned red as a beet and stammered something about propriety. "I left before I said something I would regret." James sat down heavily in a chair. "I am sorry. I did not think about how this might look to other people. I should have considered the gossip." "You have nothing to apologize for," Natalie said firmly. "You saved my life and Sarah's. I do not care what small-minded people think. The problem is, I do care what they think, because they can make life difficult." James looked frustrated. "If they decide to blackball me, I could lose business. The cattle buyers, the people I sell horses to, they listen to the town council." Natalie felt the walls closing in again. the same suffocating feeling she had experienced when every door in Winnemucca closed in her face. "Then I really should go. I will not let you lose everything because of me." "No." James' voice was sharp. "That is not what I am saying. I am not sending you away. I am just thinking through the problem." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the mantel and Sarah's soft breathing. Finally, James spoke again. "There is one solution that would stop all the talk." "What is that?" Natalie asked. James looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We could get married." Natalie felt the blood drain from her face. "What? Hear me out," James said, leaning forward. "I am not proposing a real marriage. I mean, it would be legal, but it would be a marriage of convenience, on paper only. You would keep the cabin, I would keep the house. Nothing would change except that you would have my name, and people would have no grounds to gossip. Sarah would have a father on record, which would protect her from the kind of treatment you have faced." "That is a huge sacrifice for you to make," Natalie said slowly. "You would be tied to me legally. What if you met someone you actually wanted to marry?" "I am not looking to marry anyone," James said. "I am content with my life as it is. This would solve a practical problem in a practical way." Natalie studied his face, trying to understand what he was really thinking. "Why would you do this for me? For us?" James was quiet for a long moment. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because you deserve better than to be run out of another town. Because Sarah deserves to grow up somewhere stable." He paused. "And because, if I am being honest, I have come to value your presence here. The ranch feels like a home again instead of just a place I sleep. I would like you to stay, and if this is what it takes, then I am willing to do it." "People will assume things," Natalie said. "They will assume we are actually husband and wife in every sense. Let them assume what they want. We will know the truth." James stood and walked to the window, looking out over his land. "I am not asking you to decide right now. Think about it. But know that the offer is sincere." Natalie spent the rest of the day in turmoil, her mind racing. That evening, after she had returned to the cabin and put Sarah to bed, she sat in the rocking chair by the fireplace and tried to think clearly. Marriage to James would solve so many problems. Sarah would have legitimacy, protection. They would be safe here, no longer vulnerable to the whims of judgmental townsfolk. And James was a good man, someone she had come to trust and respect over the past weeks. But it felt wrong to trap him in a loveless arrangement, even if he claimed to be willing. He deserved more than a wife in name only. He deserved someone who could give him a real partnership, a real family. Yet what were her alternatives? She had no money to leave, nowhere to go. And even if she did manage to move on, what would await her in the next town? More rejection, more doors slammed in her face. The next morning, Natalie made her decision. She arrived at the ranch house early and found James already in the kitchen, making coffee. "I will do it," she said without preamble. "I will marry you if you are truly certain this is what you want." James turned to face her, his expression serious. "I am certain." "Then yes," Natalie said. "Thank you." They were married a week later in a quiet ceremony at the courthouse in Winnemucca, with the justice of the peace and his wife as witnesses. Natalie wore her best dress, which was not saying much, and James wore a suit she had never seen before that made him look both handsome and uncomfortable. He produced a simple gold band, which he slipped onto her finger with steady hands. When the justice pronounced them husband and wife, there was an awkward moment where they both clearly did not know what to do. The justice's wife smiled kindly and said, "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Ellison." James looked at Natalie with a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and he leaned in to press a chaste, brief kiss to her lips. It lasted barely a second, but Natalie felt warmth spread through her chest nonetheless. As they left the courthouse, Now legally married, Natalie saw several townspeople watching them with barely concealed surprise and speculation. She lifted her chin and took James' offered arm, determined not to show any weakness. That night, Natalie returned to the cabin alone as planned. She looked at the gold band on her finger and wondered what she had gotten herself into. She was married to a man she barely knew, bound to him by law but not by love. It should have felt strange, wrong even, but instead she felt something like relief. For the first time since her first husband died, she had a measure of security. The weeks following the wedding passed in a blur of harvest work. James brought in hired hands to help with the cattle roundup, and Natalie found herself cooking for a crew of 6 cowboys in addition to her regular duties. The men were respectful, tipping their hats to her and calling her Mrs. Ellison, which felt surreal every time she heard it. One evening, after the hired hands had been paid and sent on their way, James invited Natalie to stay for dinner at the ranch house instead of returning to the cabin. They ate quietly, both tired from the long weeks of hard work. "I have been thinking," James said as they finished their meal. "Winter is coming. The cabin will be cold and you will be isolated out there. It does not make sense for you to stay there when there are 2 perfectly good bedrooms here." Natalie felt her pulse quicken. "Are you suggesting I move into the house?" "Into the upstairs bedroom," James clarified. "The one my sister used. It has space for Sarah's cradle. You would have privacy, but you would also have the warmth of a larger house and not be alone if something went wrong." "What would people think?" Natalie asked, though even as she said it, she realized how foolish the question was. They were married now. People would expect them to live together. "They would think a husband is taking proper care of his wife," James said simply, "which I should be doing anyway." The logic was sound, but Natalie still hesitated. Living in the cabin had given her a sense of independence, of having her own space. Moving into the house felt like crossing a line, making their arrangement more real somehow. "You do not have to decide tonight," James added, seeing her uncertainty. "But the offer stands. I want you and Sarah to be safe and comfortable." 2 weeks later, when the first snow fell and Natalie woke shivering in the cabin, despite the fire she had banked in the hearth, she made her decision. That afternoon, she told James she would accept his offer. He helped her move her few belongings, carrying the cradle up the narrow stairs to the bedroom while Natalie followed with Sarah and their clothes. The room was larger than the entire cabin, with a real bed frame, a dresser, and even a small desk by the window. James had already brought in extra firewood and laid a fresh fire in the small stove in the corner. "If you need anything," he said from the doorway, "I am just across the hall. Do not hesitate to knock." That first night in the ranch house, Natalie lay awake for hours, hyper-aware of James sleeping in the room across from hers. She could hear him moving around, the creak of the bed frame as he settled in. It felt intimate in a way that living in separate buildings had not. Life in the house quickly established its own rhythm. Natalie would rise early, feed Sarah, and start breakfast. James would come down already dressed for the day, and they would eat together in comfortable silence. After breakfast, he would head out to work while Natalie cleaned and started preparations for the midday meal. In the evenings, they often sat together in the main room, James reading or mending tack while Natalie sewed or played with Sarah. The baby was thriving, growing plump and happy. She had started smiling readily, especially at James, who seemed to have a particular talent for making her giggle. Natalie would watch them together, James large, work roughened hands gently holding Sarah's tiny fingers, and feel something warm and complicated stir in her chest. One evening in late November, a storm rolled in with a fury that shook the windows. Wind howled around the house, and snow fell so thick that Natalie could not see the barn from the kitchen window. James came in earlier than usual, covered in snow and shivering. "All the animals are secure," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "But this is going to be a bad one. Might last a few days." Natalie helped him out of his coat and brought him hot coffee, which he accepted gratefully. That night, the temperature dropped so low that even the main room with its large fireplace was cold. Natalie woke around midnight to Sarah crying, her little hands icy despite the blankets. She wrapped the baby in extra layers and tried to soothe her, but Sarah would not settle. A soft knock on her door made Natalie jump. "Is everything all right?" James' voice came through the wood. "She is just cold," Natalie said. "I cannot seem to get her warm enough." The door opened and James appeared carrying blankets. "Bring her downstairs. It is warmer by the main fire." Natalie followed him down, and they settled on the sofa that James pulled close to the hearth. He built up the fire until it roared, filling the room with blessed heat. Sarah slowly quieted, snuggling against Natalie's chest. "You should try to sleep," James said. "I will keep the fire going." "You need sleep too," Natalie protested. "I will sleep here on the sofa. If the baby needs anything, you will be right there." He spread the blankets over both of them. "Just rest." Natalie wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. She closed her eyes, Sarah warm against her, and drifted off to the sound of James adding logs to the fire. When she woke in the early morning light, she found herself leaning against James' shoulder, his arm draped loosely around both her and Sarah to keep the blankets in place. He was still asleep, his breathing deep and even. Natalie knew she should move, should put proper distance between them, but she found she did not want to. There was something comforting about his solid presence, the way he had stayed awake to tend the fire and keep them warm. She let herself have another moment, just one, before Sarah began to stir and the day demanded her attention. When James woke, they did not speak of how they had slept, of the intimacy of that shared night on the sofa. But something had shifted between them, a wall coming down brick by brick. The storm lasted 3 days, keeping them confined to the house. They talked more than they ever had before, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their losses. Natalie learned that James had a younger brother who had died of fever during the war, that his father had never recovered from his mother's death, that he had come to Nevada hoping to build something lasting in a place where the past did not define everything. James learned that Natalie had met her first husband, Richard, when she was just 17, that they had married young and spent only 2 years together before his death. He learned that she loved to read but rarely had the chance, that she had once wanted to be a teacher, that her own parents had died when she was 15, leaving her to make her own way in the world. By the time the storm broke and James could get back to his work, they had become friends in a way they had not been before. The easy silence they had shared was now punctuated by conversation, by laughter, by a growing understanding of one another. December brought more snow and long, dark evenings. Natalie began to notice small things about James that she had not paid attention to before. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The care he took with the horses, always gentle, always patient. The way he would automatically reach for Sarah when he came in, wanting to hold her even with dirt on his clothes. She noticed, too, the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention. There was something in his expression that made her breath catch, something that went beyond simple friendship or practical arrangement. One evening in mid-December, Natalie was preparing dinner when she heard a crash from the barn followed by a shout. She ran outside, not even stopping for a coat, and found James on the ground, a ladder tipped over beside him and loose boards from a damaged stall scattered around. "James," she knelt beside him. "What happened?" "Damn ladder slipped," he said through gritted teeth. "I think I twisted my ankle." Natalie helped him to his feet, letting him lean heavily on her as they made their way back to the house. She settled him in a chair and knelt to examine his ankle, which was already starting to swell. "You need to keep this elevated and iced," she said, packing snow from outside into a cloth and wrapping it around his ankle. "And you need to stay off it for at least a few days." "I cannot stay off it," James protested. "There is too much work to do." "The work can wait," Natalie said firmly. "You are no good to anyone if you injure yourself worse." Over the next few days, Natalie took on all the household duties while also doing the essential outdoor work. She fed and watered the animals, mucked out the stalls, and kept the fires burning. James chafed at being confined to the house, but his ankle forced compliance. Natalie found herself enjoying caring for him, bringing him meals and making sure he followed her instructions about keeping his ankle elevated. There was something deeply satisfying about being needed, about being the one to provide care instead of being the one always receiving it. On the third evening, as Natalie was rebandaging his ankle, James caught her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking care of everything. I know this is not what you signed up for." Natalie looked up at him, her hand still in his. "This is exactly what I signed up for. We are partners in this, remember? Partners help each other." "Partners," James repeated, but there was something in his voice that suggested he was thinking of a different word. Christmas approached, and despite their remote location and simple means, Natalie found herself wanting to make it special. She had not celebrated properly since Richard died, but something about this year felt different. She wanted to create a warm memory, for Sarah and for James and for herself. She spent her evenings making decorations from scraps of fabric and pine boughs from the trees near the creek. She baked cookies using precious sugar from their stores and made a small rag doll for Sarah. For James, she had a harder time deciding on a gift, finally settling on knitting him a scarf from yarn she unraveled from an old sweater of her own. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Natalie came downstairs to find James already awake, stoking the fire. His ankle had healed enough for him to walk with only a slight limp. "Merry Christmas," he said, turning to greet her. "Merry Christmas," Natalie replied, Sarah on her hip. James reached behind the sofa and pulled out a wrapped package. "For you." Natalie set Sarah in her basket and took the gift, surprised. She opened it carefully and found a beautiful shawl, far finer than anything she owned, in a deep blue that reminded her of the evening sky. "James, this is too much," she breathed, running her fingers over the soft wool. "It is not too much," he said. "You needed a proper shawl, and I wanted you to have something nice. Something that was just for you, not practical or necessary, but beautiful." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. I have something for you too." She handed him the scarf, suddenly self-conscious about her humble offering compared to his generous gift. James unwrapped it and immediately wound it around his neck. "It is perfect. Did you make this?" "Yes, I hope it is all right." "I am not the best knitter." "It is more than all right. It is the best gift I have received in years." James smiled at her, and Natalie felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man standing before her. They spent Christmas Day quietly, eating a special dinner that Natalie had prepared and sitting by the fire while snow fell softly outside. James held Sarah, singing to her in a low voice, and Natalie watched them with a feeling she could not quite name, but that felt dangerously close to love. That night, as she lay in bed, Natalie admitted to herself what she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with her husband. Her husband in name only, who had married her out of kindness and practicality, who saw their arrangement as a business deal, who had never suggested he wanted anything more. The realization terrified her. She had not wanted to fall in love again, had not planned for it. The pain of losing Richard had been so sharp, so devastating that she had sworn she would protect her heart. But somehow, James had slipped past her defenses with his quiet kindness, his steadiness, his gentle way with her daughter. She did not know what to do with these feelings. Telling James felt impossible, too risky. What if he did not feel the same way? What if he saw her confession as a violation of their agreement? She could lose everything, the safety and security she had found here, the friendship they had built. So Natalie kept her feelings locked away, hidden behind smiles and efficient household management. But it grew harder every day, especially as winter wore on, and they spent long evenings together in the firelight, talking about everything and nothing. January brought a cold snap that froze the creek and kept them close to the house. One evening, James was teaching Natalie to play checkers, something she had never learned. She was terrible at it, and he was laughing at her hopeless strategy when she suddenly blurted out, "Why did you never marry before? Before me, I mean." James' laughter faded, and he looked down at the checkerboard. "I was engaged once, long time ago, back in Tennessee." Natalie felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy. "What happened?" Her name was Margaret. "We grew up together, planned to marry after the war ended, but when I came back, I was different. Hard. I had seen things, done things that changed me, and my family had lost everything." We had nothing to offer her, no prospects. James moved a checker absently. Her father suggested she should look elsewhere for a husband, someone with better prospects. She agreed. "I am sorry," Natalie said softly. James shrugged. "It was a long time ago." And honestly, I think her father was right. I was not in a good place then. I would have made a terrible husband. "You are not a terrible husband now," Natalie said before she could stop herself. James looked up at her, his eyes searching her face. "I am hardly a husband at all, though, am I? This arrangement we have, it is not a real marriage." Natalie's heart pounded. "What if I wanted it to be?" The words hung in the air between them. James went very still. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like an arrangement to me. You are not just my business partner or my employer or even my friend." Natalie took a shaky breath. "You are my husband, James, and I want to be your wife, really and truly." James stood up so abruptly he knocked over the checkerboard, pieces scattering across the floor. For a horrible moment, Natalie thought he was going to walk away, going to tell her she had overstepped. But instead, he crossed to where she sat and dropped to his knees beside her chair. "Natalie," he said, his voice rough, "I have been in love with you for months. I wanted to tell you, but I did not know how. I did not want to pressure you or make you feel obligated. Our agreement was for a marriage in name only, and I thought that was all you wanted." "You love me," Natalie whispered. "From almost the first day," James said. "When you insisted on working for your keep instead of accepting charity, when you took on the garden and brought life back to this place, when you made Sarah laugh for the first time and I saw joy on your face. I fell in love with your strength, your kindness, your courage." Natalie cupped his face in her hands. "I love you too. I tried not to, I was afraid, but I do. I love you, James." He kissed her then, not the brief, chaste kiss of their wedding day, but a real kiss, deep and full of longing. Natalie kissed him back, pouring all her pent-up feelings into it, months of wanting and hoping and denying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, give you the romance you deserve." Natalie laughed. "We are already married. We live in the same house. I think we can skip straight to the part where we are actually husband and wife." "Are you sure?" James asked. "I do not want you to feel rushed." I am sure, Natalie said firmly. I have never been more sure of anything. That night, Natalie did not return to her separate bedroom. She and James went upstairs together, and for the first time, their marriage became real in every sense. James was gentle and patient, treating her like something precious. Natalie felt safe and loved and wanted, all the things she had thought she might never feel again. In the morning, she woke in James' arms, sunlight streaming through the window and Sarah babbling happily in her cradle. James was already awake, watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her chest ache. "Good morning, wife," he said softly. "Good morning, husband," Natalie replied and kissed him. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Natalie's life. She and James were openly affectionate now, stealing kisses when they passed each other in the house, sitting close together in the evenings, falling asleep entwined every night. Sarah adored James, reaching for him whenever he came near, calling him Da when she started to babble her first words. Spring came to the Nevada high desert in a riot of wildflowers and new grass. James hired a crew to expand the ranch house, adding a proper parlor and another bedroom. "For when Sarah gets older and needs her own space," he explained, "and for any other children we might have." The mention of more children made Natalie blush, but also filled her with hope. She wanted to give James children of his own, wanted to build a real family with him. In April, they got their wish. Natalie discovered she was pregnant, and James' joy was so profound it brought tears to her eyes. He insisted she rest more, taking on extra household tasks despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. "I am going to take care of you," he said firmly. "Both of you. That is what husbands do." One warm day in May, Natalie convinced James to take a break from his work and go on a picnic with her and Sarah. They packed a basket and walked to a spot by the creek where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the water burbled over smooth stones. As they sat on a blanket, Sarah toddling around nearby and James' hand resting on Natalie's still flat stomach, Natalie felt a wave of contentment so strong it almost hurt. "What are you thinking?" James asked, noticing her expression. "I am thinking about how different my life is now compared to a year ago," Natalie said. "A year ago, I was alone and terrified, turned away by an entire town, sleeping in a barn with no idea what would happen to me and my baby. And now I am sitting here with you, happy and safe and loved, about to welcome another child. It feels almost like a dream." James pulled her close. "It is not a dream. This is real, all of it. You fought for it, and you deserve every bit of happiness." "We fought for it," Natalie corrected. "You took a chance on me when no one else would. You gave me the key, James, not just to the cabin, but to a whole new life." "You gave me a new life too," James said. "This ranch was just a place before you came. You turned it into a home. You turned me into someone who knows how to love again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Sarah chase butterflies and listening to the creek. Eventually, Natalie spoke again. "I want to go into town." James tensed. "Why? You know how they are." "Because I am not going to hide anymore," Natalie said. "I am Mrs. James Ellison, and I have every right to walk through Winnemucca with my head held high. Those people judged me unfairly, but I refused to let them make me feel ashamed. I did nothing wrong." "You want me to come with you?" James asked. "No," Natalie said. "I need to do this myself." "Will you watch Sarah?" The following week, Natalie drove the wagon into Winnemucca alone. She wore her best dress and the blue shawl James had given her for Christmas, her wedding ring gleaming on her finger. She walked down the main street with her spine straight and her eyes forward, ignoring the stares and whispers. Her first stop was the general store, the same one where the proprietor had turned her away. The man's eyes widened when she walked in. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, his tone uncertain. "What can I do for you?" "I need flour, sugar, coffee, and fabric for a baby quilt," Natalie said calmly, pulling out her list. "My husband sent me to purchase supplies." The man hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Of course, right away." As he gathered her items, Natalie looked around the store, noting the other customers watching her with barely concealed curiosity. When the proprietor tallied her purchases, she paid without comment and loaded the supplies into her wagon. Her next stop was the boarding house where she had first been rejected. She knocked on the door, and the same stern-faced woman answered. "I am Natalie Ellison," Natalie said before the woman could speak. "You turned me away last summer when I needed help." "I am not here for an apology, because I do not think you are sorry, but I want you to know that I survived despite your cruelty. I found kindness where you offered none, and I am thriving. I hope the next person who comes to your door desperate and afraid gets better treatment than I did." The woman's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Natalie turned and walked away, feeling lighter than she had in months. She made one more stop at the church. The Reverend was in his office, and he looked surprised when Natalie appeared in his doorway. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, standing, "this is unexpected." "Reverend, I wanted to speak with you about something," Natalie said. "When I came to this town last summer, I was turned away by everyone, including members of your congregation. I understand that people make judgments, but I wonder if you might consider preaching about compassion and charity towards strangers. The next person who arrives in need might not be as fortunate as I was to find help outside of town." The Reverend had the grace to look ashamed. "You are right. We failed you, and for that I am truly sorry. I will address this with the congregation." "Thank you," Natalie said. "That is all I wanted to hear." When she returned to the ranch, James met her at the door, Sarah in his arms. "How did it go?" "It went well," Natalie said, and told him everything. When she finished, James set Sarah down and pulled Natalie into a fierce hug. "I am so proud of you," he murmured into her hair. "You are the strongest person I know." The summer passed in a golden haze of work and love. The garden flourished, the cattle were healthy, and the ranch prospered. Natalie's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and by August her belly had rounded noticeably. James was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if she should rest. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Natalie told him with exasperated affection. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife and my baby," James said stubbornly. "I am allowed to worry." In September, on a cool evening when the first hint of autumn touched the air, Natalie went into labor. James rode for the midwife from a neighboring ranch while Natalie breathed through contractions, trying to stay calm. Sarah, nearly a year old now, toddled around the room, blissfully unaware that her world was about to change. The midwife arrived quickly, a capable woman named Martha, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. She shooed James out of the room, telling him to make himself useful by keeping Sarah occupied. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. James paced downstairs, Sarah finally asleep on his shoulder, listening to the sounds from above and feeling helpless. When he finally heard a baby's cry, strong and angry, he nearly wept with relief. Martha came down the stairs, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Ellison. And your wife did wonderfully. She is tired but fine." James handed Sarah to Martha and took the stairs two at a time. He found Natalie in their bed, pale and exhausted but with a radiant smile on her face. In her arms was a tiny bundle, red-faced and squalling. "James, meet your son," Natalie said softly. James sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby, his and Natalie's. The infant had stopped crying and was blinking up at them with unfocused eyes. "He is perfect," James whispered. "You are perfect. I love you so much." "I love you too," Natalie said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but had never settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, James said, "Joseph, Joseph Richard Ellison." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. Richard had been her first husband's name. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," James said. "He was part of your story, part of what brought you to me. I want to honor that." They named the baby Joseph Richard Ellison, and he grew strong and healthy, a perfect blend of both his parents. Sarah was fascinated by her baby brother, wanting to help with everything, and showing a gentleness that surprised both James and Natalie. As Joseph's first Christmas approached, James surprised Natalie by announcing he had hired a carpenter to build a bigger barn and additional corrals. "Why do we need more space?" Natalie asked. "Because the ranch is growing," James said. "I have been thinking about breeding horses more seriously, training them for sale. With the railroad expanding, there is going to be a bigger market. I want to build something substantial, something we can pass on to Joseph and Sarah." Natalie loved his ambition, his vision for their future. She threw herself into helping however she could, managing the household and the children while James worked to expand the ranch operations. The following spring, James made his first major horse sale, a string of 10 well-trained mounts to a freight company in Elko. The money was more than they had seen in years, and James used it to buy more breeding stock and improve the ranch infrastructure. By Sarah's second birthday in the summer of 1878, the Ellison Ranch had become one of the most respected horse operations in the territory. James hired 2 permanent ranch hands to help with the work, and Natalie found herself managing a much larger household, cooking for the hands and keeping everything running smoothly. Despite the increased work, Natalie had never been happier. She and James had built a true partnership, each contributing to the ranch's success in different ways. In the evenings, after the children were asleep and the hands had gone to their bunkhouse, she and James would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about their dreams for the future. One evening in late July, as they sat in their usual spot, Natalie said, "I have something to tell you." James looked at her and understanding dawned in his eyes. "You are pregnant again." "Yes," Natalie said, smiling. "Are you happy?" "Happy." James pulled her into his lap. "I am overjoyed. Our family is growing, our ranch is thriving, and I wake up every morning next to the woman I love. I could not ask for anything more." Their third child, a daughter they named Julia Marie, was born the following March. Unlike Joseph's difficult birth, Julia arrived quickly and easily, announcing her presence with a healthy set of lungs that suggested she would not be a quiet child. Sarah and Joseph were delighted with their baby sister, though 2-year-old Joseph was a bit jealous of the attention the baby received. Natalie and James navigated the challenges of 3 children with the same teamwork they brought to everything else, supporting each other through sleepless nights and chaotic days. As the years passed, the Ellison family became a fixture in the community. The initial scandal of Natalie's arrival had long been forgotten, replaced by respect for the hardworking family that had built one of the most successful ranches in the area. James became known for his quality horses and fair dealing, while Natalie earned a reputation for her kindness and her willingness to help neighboring families in times of need. On a warm evening in June of 1882, the family gathered for Sarah's 6th birthday. She was a bright, energetic child who loved helping her father with the horses. Joseph, nearly 4, followed his older sister everywhere, desperate to keep up. Baby Julia, just over a year old, toddled around the yard, getting into everything. As Natalie watched her children play while James supervised from the porch, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought back to that desperate day when she had stumbled into Winnemucca with baby Sarah, alone and rejected, with nowhere to turn. She remembered the terror of not knowing where her next meal would come from or where she would sleep. And then she thought of James, finding her in his barn and offering not just shelter, but dignity. The key he had given her to the cabin had been more than just a piece of metal. It had been a symbol of trust, of respect, of a chance at a new beginning. That key had unlocked so much more than a door. It had unlocked a future she had never imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just how blessed we are," Natalie said, leaning into his side. "How blessed I am." "We both are," James said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "You took a chance on me just as much as I took a chance on you." "Best decision I ever made," Natalie said. They stood together, watching their children play as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel over the high desert, unchanging and eternal. The ranch hands had gone into town for the evening, giving the family privacy. After the children were fed and bathed and tucked into their beds, Natalie and James sat on the porch swing he had built 2 summers ago, moving gently in the cool evening breeze. "You ever think about that first night?" Natalie asked. "When you found me in the barn?" "All the time," James said. "I think about how close I came to not going to the barn that morning. I had considered putting off the chores, sleeping in a bit later. If I had, you might have left before I knew you were there." "I think fate brought us together," Natalie said. "Everything that happened, as terrible as it was at the time, led me to you. Richard's death, the town's rejection, all of it was somehow part of the path that brought me home." "Home," James repeated. "This is your home now, truly?" "It has been home for a long time," Natalie said. "Since the day you gave me the key." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of deep partnership and love. The sounds of the night surrounded them, crickets chirping, a distant coyote howling, the soft rustle of wind through the grass. "I want to expand the house again," James said eventually. "Add a proper dining room, maybe a room for entertaining. We are doing well enough that we can afford it, and I want you to have a beautiful home." "This home is already beautiful," Natalie said. "But I would not say no to more space, especially with 3 energetic children." They talked about their plans, their dreams for the ranch and for their family. James wanted to start breeding a particular line of horses he had his eye on, while Natalie had been thinking about starting a small school for the ranch children and those from neighboring properties, since the nearest schoolhouse was 15 miles away. "You would be an excellent teacher," James said. "You are patient and kind, and you love learning." "It is something I always wanted to do," Natalie admitted. "Before Richard died, we talked about me teaching once we were settled. Maybe I can still do it, just in a different way." "Then we will make it happen," James said. "We can convert the old cabin into a schoolhouse. It is sitting empty anyway, and it is big enough for a classroom." Natalie kissed him, overwhelmed by his constant support of her dreams. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" "Not in the last hour," James said with a smile. "I was starting to worry." "I love you," Natalie said seriously. "More than I can ever express. You saved me, James. You and your kindness and your willingness to see me as a person instead of a problem to be solved or avoided." "You saved me too," James said. "I was living, but I was not alive. You brought color back into my world, gave me a reason to build instead of just maintain. You gave me a family, a real home, a future worth working toward." They made love that night with the gentle familiarity of long-married lovers, their passion tempered by tenderness and deep affection. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed, Natalie traced patterns on James' chest and thought about how far they had come. The years continued to pass in the way they do when life is good, each season bringing its own rhythm of work and celebration. Sarah grew into a capable horsewoman, often riding out with James to check the herds. Joseph showed an aptitude for working with his hands, helping the ranch hands with repairs and building projects. Julia was the family's charmer, able to wrap everyone around her little finger with her bright smile and clever words. In 1884, Natalie opened her school in the converted cabin, teaching not just her own children but also the children from 3 neighboring ranches. She had 6 students that first year, ranging in age from 5 to 10, and she loved every challenging, rewarding moment of it. James could not have been prouder, often telling anyone who would listen about his wife, the teacher. He made sure she had all the books and supplies she needed, ordering materials from as far away as San Francisco to ensure her students had the best education possible. That same year, they welcomed their 4th child, another son they named Thomas James. With 4 children, the house was full of noise and life and love. Natalie sometimes felt exhausted trying to manage everything, but she would not have changed a thing. One autumn afternoon, as Natalie was teaching her students and James was working with a young stallion in the corral, a familiar wagon pulled up to the ranch. Tom Wheeler, the church council president who had once confronted James about Natalie living on the property, climbed down slowly, his movements suggesting age had caught up with him. James wiped his hands and walked over, his expression neutral. "Mr. Wheeler, what brings you out here?" Tom looked uncomfortable. "I wanted to speak with you and your wife if she has a moment." James called to Natalie, and she dismissed her students early before walking over to join them, curiosity and a hint of old wariness in her eyes. "Mrs. Ellison," Tom said, removing his hat. "Thank you for your time. I know I am not your favorite person, and I do not blame you for that." "What is this about?" Natalie asked directly. Tom took a deep breath. "I came to apologize. It is years overdue, but I have been thinking about it more and more. The way the town treated you when you first arrived, the way I treated you and your husband, it was wrong. We judged you without knowing your story, without offering the Christian charity we claim to value." Natalie was silent, processing this unexpected apology. Tom continued, "I have watched from a distance as you built this ranch, as you have raised your children and contributed to this community. You have proven yourself to be a woman of integrity and strength. I was wrong about you, and I am sorry. The whole town was wrong. What brought this on?" James asked, his tone skeptical. "My daughter," Tom said quietly. "She found herself in a difficult situation recently. Her husband died suddenly, leaving her with 2 small children and debts. She came to stay with us, and some people in town have been saying ugly things, suggesting she should have managed better, that she must have done something to deserve her hardship. It made me realize how we treated you, Mrs. Ellison, and how wrong it was, how cruel." Natalie felt a pang of sympathy despite her lingering hurt. "I am sorry about your daughter's situation. No one deserves to be judged in their time of grief and need." "No, they do not," Tom agreed. "And I am ashamed that I was part of doing that to you. I cannot undo the past, but I wanted you to know that I recognize my wrong and I am sorry." Natalie looked at James, who gave her a small nod, leaving the decision to her. She turned back to Tom. "I accept your apology. What happened is in the past, and we have built a good life despite it. I hope your daughter finds the help and support she needs." Tom's relief was visible. "Thank you. That is more grace than I deserve." He hesitated. "There is one more thing. The town council wants to know if you would consider expanding your school, maybe moving it into town where more children could attend. We would provide the building and help with supplies." Natalie was stunned. "You want me to teach in town?" "We do. We have heard wonderful things about your teaching from the families whose children attend. You have a gift, and more children should benefit from it." "I will think about it," Natalie said carefully, "and discuss it with my husband." After Tom left, Natalie and James sat on the porch steps, watching the children play in the yard. "What do you think?" Natalie asked. "I think it is your decision," James said, "but I will support whatever you choose." "It would be a lot more work," Natalie mused. "More students, more responsibility. But it would also mean reaching more children, giving more families access to education." "You would be amazing at it," James said. "But you also have 4 children of your own to care for. It is all right to say no." Natalie thought about it for several days before making her decision. She would accept the position but only teach 3 days a week, keeping the other days for her own family and the small class she had started. It was a compromise that felt right. The town school opened in the spring of 1885, with Natalie teaching 15 students in a renovated building near the church. She quickly became one of the most respected members of the community, known for her dedication to her students and her ability to make even the most difficult subjects engaging. James continued to expand the ranch, now running over 300 head of cattle and maintaining a breeding program that produced some of the finest horses in the territory. He hired more hands and built a proper bunkhouse, creating a small community on the ranch property. Their children thrived. Sarah, at 9, was already helping her father train horses. Joseph, at 7, showed an interest in the business side of the ranch, asking questions about prices and markets. Julia, at 5, was attending her mother's school and proving to be a quick learner. And little Thomas, just a toddler, followed everyone around on sturdy legs, chattering constantly. In 1886, Natalie discovered she was pregnant for the 5th time. At 32, she felt the pregnancy more than she had the previous ones, but she was still happy at the prospect of another child. James fretted over her constantly, insisting she cut back on her teaching and let the older children help more with household tasks. Their 5th child, a daughter named Alice Ruth, was born in early 1887. She was a placid, happy baby who seemed content to watch the world go by with calm, observant eyes. With 5 children and a thriving ranch and school, life was full and busy. But Natalie and James made sure to carve out time for each other, still sitting on the porch in the evenings when they could, still stealing moments of intimacy and connection amid the chaos of family life. On their 10th wedding anniversary in the fall of 1887, James surprised Natalie by arranging for the children to stay with a neighboring family for the night. He took her into Winnemucca, to the hotel where she had once been turned away. "James, what are we doing here?" Natalie asked as he helped her down from the wagon. "We are staying the night," James said. "Just the 2 of us. I booked the best room they have, and we are going to have a nice dinner and sleep late and remember what it is like to be just a husband and wife instead of parents and ranchers and teachers." The hotel clerk recognized them and greeted them warmly, a far cry from the cold rejection Natalie had received a decade earlier. Their room was lovely, with a real bathtub and soft linens and a view of the main street. Over dinner at the hotel restaurant, James presented Natalie with a gift, a delicate necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a key. "So you never forget," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "The key that started everything." Natalie touched the pendant, tears in her eyes. "As if I could ever forget. That key changed my life. You changed my life." "We changed each other's lives," James corrected. "Everything good I have because you walked into my barn that morning." They talked late into the night, reminiscing about the past 10 years and dreaming about the future. They made love slowly, luxuriously, without the constant awareness of children in the next room. And in the morning they slept late, wrapped in each other's arms, content and deeply in love. The years continued to unfold. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Sarah, as expected, took over more and more of the horse training operation, showing a natural talent that exceeded even James' considerable skill. Joseph went away to a business college in San Francisco when he was 18, returning 2 years later with ideas about expanding into new markets and modernizing the ranch operations. Julia surprised everyone by wanting to become a doctor, an unusual ambition for a young woman, but one that Natalie and James supported wholeheartedly. They sent her to medical school back east, and she returned to Nevada as one of the few female physicians in the territory, setting up a practice in Winnemucca. Thomas became a gifted carpenter, designing and building not just ranch structures but homes and businesses throughout the region. And Alice, the youngest, followed in her mother's footsteps, becoming a teacher at the very school where Natalie still taught part-time. By 1900, James and Natalie were in their mid-40s, their hair showing threads of gray and their faces marked by the lines that come from years of laughter and hard work. The ranch was now one of the largest in the state, employing over 20 people and producing cattle and horses that were sought after across the West. Their children had all found their callings, and while not all had stayed in Nevada, they remained close as a family, gathering for holidays and important occasions. Sarah had married a fellow rancher and had given James and Natalie their first grandchildren, twin boys who showed every sign of being as horse-crazy as their mother. One evening, as Natalie and James sat on their porch, now graced by comfortable rocking chairs and flowering plants in abundance, Natalie said, "Can you believe it has been almost 25 years since I slept in your barn?" James reached over and took her hand. 25 years since the best day of my life. The day you found a desperate woman trespassing on your property, Natalie teased. The day I found my wife, James corrected. My partner, the mother of my children, my best friend. Natalie squeezed his hand. I still remember how afraid I was that morning, certain you would send me away like everyone else had. And then you offered me breakfast instead. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, James said. Protecting your baby, refusing to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, before I even knew your name. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains in a blaze of orange and purple. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Sarah's voice calling them in for dinner. We built something good here, Natalie said. Something lasting. We did, James agreed, and it all started with a key. Natalie touched the necklace she still wore every day, the little key pendant that had become her most treasured possession. The key to my new life. To our life, James said. Everything we have, we built together. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, James stood and offered Natalie his hand. Come on, Mrs. Ellison. Let us go have dinner with our family. Natalie took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They walked toward the house together, their steps synchronized after so many years of walking side by side. Through the windows, they could see their children and grandchildren, the family they had created from nothing but hope and love and stubborn determination. The town that had once turned Natalie away had long since become a true home. The barn where James had found her was still standing, now part of a sprawling ranch operation. And the key he had given her, both the real one and the symbolic one, had unlocked a future beyond anything either of them could have imagined. As they stepped into the warm glow of their home, surrounded by the laughter and love of their family, Natalie sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For James, who had seen her worth when others saw only judgment, for the strength she had found within herself to keep going when everything seemed impossible, for the love that had grown from a practical arrangement into something deep and true and lasting. The journey had not always been easy. There had been hard winters and dry summers, sick children and financial worries, moments of doubt and fear. But through it all, they had held onto each other, their partnership the foundation upon which everything else was built. That night, after the dishes were washed and the grandchildren were tucked into bed and their own children had returned to their respective homes, Natalie and James climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same room they had shared for over 2 decades. As they got ready for bed, moving through the familiar routine with the ease of long practice, James said, "I have been thinking about the future." "Oh," Natalie said, brushing out her hair. "Joseph wants to take over more of the daily operations. He has good ideas, modern ideas. I think it might be time to step back a bit, let the next generation lead." "And what would we do with all that free time?" Natalie asked, smiling. "I thought maybe we could travel," James said. "See some of the country beyond Nevada. Visit Julia in New York, maybe go to California and see the ocean. We have worked hard for 25 years. Maybe it is time to enjoy the fruits of that labor." Natalie considered this. The idea of traveling, of seeing new places with James by her side, was appealing. "I think I would like that." "Yeah," James came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Yeah," Natalie confirmed, leaning back against him. "As long as I am with you, I am home no matter where we are." They made plans over the following months, gradually transferring more responsibility to Joseph and Sarah. By the spring of 1901, they were ready for their first adventure, a trip to San Francisco, where Natalie would finally see the ocean. Standing on the beach with the Pacific stretching out before her, waves crashing against the shore and seabirds wheeling overhead, Natalie felt overwhelmed by the beauty and vastness of it all. James stood beside her, their hands clasped, and they watched in companionable silence. "It is magnificent," Natalie breathed. "It is," James agreed, "but I still prefer our desert sunsets." Natalie laughed. "You are biased." "Absolutely," James said, pulling her close. "Nevada has everything I love most in the world: you, our family, our home." "The ocean is beautiful, but it is not home." They traveled for 6 months, visiting Julia in New York, seeing the grand cities of the East, and experiencing things they had only read about. But when they finally returned to Nevada, to their ranch and their family, the feeling of coming home was overwhelming. Sarah and Joseph had managed everything beautifully in their absence, proving they were ready to take the reins. James and Natalie settled into a new phase of life, one with less daily responsibility but no less purpose. They spent time with their grandchildren, traveled when the mood struck, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of being together without the constant demands of running a large operation. On a warm summer evening in 1905, the extended Ellison family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. It was James and Natalie's 28th wedding anniversary, but more than that, it was a celebration of family, of legacy, of the life they had built together. 3 generations filled the house and spilled out onto the porch and into the yard. Sarah and her husband with their 4 children, Joseph and his wife with their 2, Julia, still unmarried but accompanied by a medical colleague who was clearly more than just a friend, Thomas and his fiancée, planning a fall wedding, and Alice with her students, some of whom had become like family over the years. As the evening wore on, and the younger children were put to bed, and the adults settled in for conversation and laughter, Natalie found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of that terrified young woman who had stumbled into Winnemucca with a baby and no prospects, turned away at every door. She thought of the desperation that had driven her to sleep in a stranger's barn. And she thought of James, the cowboy who had found her and chosen kindness over judgment, generosity over fear. That single act of compassion had rippled out across the years, creating not just a family but a legacy. The ranch employed dozens of people, providing livelihoods for families across the region. The school educated hundreds of children, giving them opportunities they might not have had otherwise. And the example James and Natalie set, of love and partnership and perseverance, had influenced their children and would influence their grandchildren in turn. "Penny for your thoughts," James said, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," Natalie said, accepting the glass. "How lucky we are." "Lucky," James repeated thoughtfully. "I think we made our own luck. You were brave enough to keep going when most would have given up. I was smart enough to recognize a good thing when I found her in my barn. Everything after that was choice and effort and love." "You are probably right," Natalie conceded, "but I still feel blessed." They watched their family together, the children playing, the adults talking and laughing, the whole beautiful, chaotic, loving scene. "You have any regrets?" James asked. "Anything you wish had been different?" Natalie thought about it seriously. "No," she said finally. "Not a single one. Even the hard parts, the painful parts, they all led here. I would not change any of it." "Neither would I," James said. He raised his glass. "To 28 years of marriage, to our beautiful family, and to the woman who changed my life by sleeping in my barn." Natalie laughed and clinked her glass against his. "To the cowboy who gave me the key to everything I ever wanted." As the stars came out and the evening deepened, the family gradually dispersed, children claimed by sleep and adults by the need to return to their own homes. When the house was finally quiet, just James and Natalie and the gentle sounds of the night, they took one last walk around the property. They visited the barn where their story had begun, now expanded and modernized but still essentially the same. They walked past the cabin where Natalie had first lived, now beautifully maintained as a guest house for visiting family. They stood in the garden, fragrant with late blooming flowers, and looked back at the house with its warm, glowing windows. "This is our legacy," James said, gesturing to encompass it all. "Not just the buildings and the land, but the life we have created here, the family we have raised, the love we have shared." "It is a good legacy," Natalie said. "I am proud of what we have built." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their steps slower than they used to be, but no less sure. Inside, they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, to the bed they had shared for so many years, to the home they had made together. As they settled in for the night, Natalie curled into James' side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was home. Not the house or the ranch or even the land, but this, being close to the man she loved, the man who had saved her and let her save him in return. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," James replied, his arm tightening around her. "Always have, always will." And as they drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the evidence of their life together, Natalie sent up one final prayer of gratitude. For the key that had opened the door to her new life, for the cowboy who had given it to her, and for the love that had sustained them through nearly 3 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. The town had turned her away with a baby. A cowboy had found her in his barn and given her the key. And that simple act of kindness had changed everything, creating a love story for the ages and a family that would endure long after they were gone. It was, Natalie thought as sleep finally claimed her, the perfect ending to a story that had begun with such fear and uncertainty. But it was not really an ending at all. It was just another chapter in a love that would continue as long as their children and grandchildren remembered the unlikely beginning of James and Natalie Ellison, and the key that had unlocked it all.